I'm Dave Anderson, and I serve as chair for the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Today is Monday, March 9th, 2026. I ask the members of the board to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that is being conducted in hybrid form. Some individuals remote by conference call or other electronic medium, and some individuals present at the board's office. Denise Seisman.
Present.
Jill Flessing.
Present.
Linda Heitzman Powell.
Present.
Donna Honer-Queel is not here today, and neither is Mary Jones. Jim Kilmartin.
Yes.
Richard Nobles may be joining us a little late. Andrea Perdomo Morales.
Present.
Cynthia Shandell.
Present.
Laura Shaughnessy.
Present.
David Stevens.
Present.
I note the following staff members are also present. David Fly here. Leslie Allen.
Here.
Cindy DeArpel.
Here.
Tim Resner, serving as legal counsel for the board, is also present.
I'm here.
Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
Thank you, Dave. This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the board about any concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or KOMA, does not require the board to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the Executive Director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. No time has been reserved for public comment, as no individuals requested time for public comment. Because we are conducting this public meeting in hybrid form, I state for the record the following information. Access to this meeting is conducted in person and by medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting either in person or by using the conference call or by viewing the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted in hybrid form, the requirements of KOMA are not suspended. Therefore, we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the KOMA. On January 15th, 2026, we sent notice to the board meeting to all individuals who had requested notice of such meetings. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other meeting material have been posted on the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda specifically by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel, allowing the members of the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if we have any technical issues during the meeting, you may send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of this meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. The conference call line is active. I did check it before we got started. There's no one currently on the line, but if someone connects and introduces themselves, I will let you know.
Thank you. And I see Richard's joined us. The meeting is now called to order and the board will begin its discussion of the first item on the agenda. So we'll start with approval of the agenda. Dave, did you have some additions to that?
Yes, and my apologies. There were, under new business, there's a number of regulations that have been recommended for the board to review and approve during the meeting today. I was mistaken in listing all of the ones that should have been listed. There were several from the Addiction Counseling Advisory Committee. That committee met, I believe, the day after the board meeting in January, and so I was mixed up with the dates there. I thought some of those had already been reviewed and approved. So if someone is okay with this adjustment, I would request that the agenda is modified to add review of the following regulations for addiction counseling. And Leslie can go ahead and kind of name off which ones that would be.
It's 102-7-4, 102-7-4A, 102-7-4B, 102-7-7, 102-7-8. And then there were two regs that were on the agenda that I need removed. 102-2-2B and 2C. Those I'll bring next time.
Are those under the social work?
Yes.
Committee? Okay.
Do you need a motion to modify the agenda?
Yes, please.
Yes.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. We have no one for public comment, is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. That takes us to review and approval of minutes from previous board meetings on January 2026, and January 2026. Has everybody had an opportunity to review those?
And just for clarification, the minutes from January 27th were included when their original materials were sent out. There was a follow-up email this morning that had the minutes from January 12th. Both sets of minutes have been posted on the board's website. So if you were looking for the second set of minutes, that they were in separate emails. So my apologies about that, but those are where the minutes were located.
Any additions or changes to those minutes? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes from those meetings.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Dave, that takes us to your executive director's report.
All right, thank you, Dave. First, I would like to give you an update. At one of our previous meetings, we had talked about moving towards requiring background checks for licensure, and I want to give you an update on that process. We have had several meetings with representatives from the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, and we need approval from them before they can run those background checks for our licensees. And so we also want to make sure that once we start this new process, we're going to be able to do it right. So our current plan is to open up the background check requirement as an opt-in for individuals that have a clinical professional counseling license so that they can optionally do this background check to become eligible for the professional counseling multi-state compact. And so that is the group that we're really focusing on first. We are still waiting from KBI to give us the authority to actually go ahead and start the background check process, but I believe we're getting close. I think sometime at least in the next couple months, they should start to allow this process, but we have started to share information about our plan, which will be to allow individuals to essentially request a fingerprint card from us. We will send that to them at the appropriate format, and then they will be able to take that to law enforcement and pay the relevant fee for the background check. Our staff will be able to review that and make a note in the system as long as everything comes back clear, or if not, we will move forward at having the board look at those items to see if they were previously disclosed and moving forward with that. So we are moving forward on this. We are opening that up first to the clinical professional counselors when KBI gives us the go ahead. And then ultimately, once we have the process down, we do plan to go ahead and open this up as a new requirement for licensure like the board had voted in favor of. But we want to make sure that we are all properly trained and we know how to handle this process so that it'll go smoothly. So that's where we are currently at. Hopefully we'll have a more definitive update for you at the next board meeting, but I think we're very close, at least for the professional counseling individuals. In terms of some other operations updates, under outreach, I do like to provide the board an update on the number of broadcasts and views for our YouTube channel. We broadcast board meetings and advisory committee meetings. Currently, we have broadcast 240 meetings, either live or uploaded after the fact, and they have been viewed 12,647 times. In terms of another outreach effort, one of the biggest responsibilities I think that we have as an agency is to be proactive in talking to students before they become licensed. I think we have some individuals that have had complaints filed against them or have had violations because they were unfamiliar with, let's say, the rules of unprofessional conduct or other standards. And so we're really trying to make an effort to go out there and talk to schools to help them with the application process, to make sure that that process is smooth, and then to also make sure they understand once you become licensed, what is your responsibility as a professional in terms of the professional conduct standards. So Leslie Allen, the assistant director, and I do those presentations. We've been building a network of different universities and colleges that we're talking to. And so recent presentations that we have done include social work students at Newman University, Washburn, Wichita State. We have some other presentations to counseling students at Avila, Central Seminary, Kansas University, and Mid-American Nazarene. And then some psychology students also at Avila and KU. And then upcoming presentations, we have a presentation to social workers at Bethel College, Fort Hays State University, and K-State, and then others. Just recently, we had the opportunity to connect with a few more schools, and so we're going to be setting up even more presentations. And we do these in the fall as well. But I just kind of wanted to put a spotlight on these because we've been getting a lot more requests for these presentations, and I think it's a really valuable experience. And so I just wanted to make sure that you knew who we were reaching out to in the state. And so if you are familiar with another school and you're curious if we've been able to connect with them, please let us know and we'd be happy to set up more presentations as well. In terms of an update on the budget for the BSRB, at the beginning of this calendar year, our cash balance was, or actually the beginning of this fiscal year, our cash balance was about $1,817,000 in the BSRB fee fund. The current balance in the fee fund is $1,679,000 and change. So for the year, revenue has been about $521,000. Expenditures is about $679,000. You may recall this was somewhat by design. The board did design that expenditures would be higher than revenue because basically there would be the board implemented a decrease in licensing fees, license renewal fees. And this was in an effort to draw down the balance over time. There is an additional fee decrease for some of the original license fees the board has recommended, and those regulations at the last meeting were pending with the Department of Administration. Since that point, they have been approved by the Department of Administration. We provided those to the Attorney General's office, and they are pending with the Attorney General's office. So we're waiting to hear back. But some of the notable expenditures recently, we are still paying for a licensing system services through the Board of Healing Arts, and that's not a expense that's spread out over the entire year. It really hits at one point, and it's roughly a little over $75,000 for the year. So when we pay that bill, it has some of the expenses a little bit higher at that time. But we expect that we will still be looking in good shape in terms of the balance in the BSRB fund at the end of this year. Probably we will have a little bit higher of a balance than we have right now based on not so many big expenses yet to come, but revenue should come in, especially from students when they get close to graduating and start applying for licensure in the spring. Moving next to some legislative updates. At the last full board meeting, we talked about the legislative process starting. The legislature does tend to meet for about 90 days during each spring. And during that time, they review agency budget submissions. They also look at any bills that individuals request. There was a special board meeting that was held on January 27th for the purpose of reviewing House Bill 2506, which would have created a new type of license under the addiction counseling profession. At that time, the board had concerns about that bill for several reasons. One of those was House Bill 2506 did not include educational qualifications, training qualifications, did not include certain language for other professions, such as that the individuals would need to merit the public trust. The board did have concerns, and when that bill had been introduced, we had been meeting with the advocates for the bill to try to see if there could be some common ground on an alternate proposal. Since that meeting that was held, at that board meeting on January 27th, it was the decision of the board that at the upcoming hearing on the bill, the board would like me to submit opponent testimony given the concerns with the bill, the way that it was drafted. And the board was informed that there was ongoing conversation and that the advocates for the bill were open to some changes, but given that the bill was in printed form, the board needed to weigh in on the bill as it was currently written. So since that time, the hearing on the bill was canceled to allow more time for the advocates and different stakeholders, including the BSRB, to come together and have additional conversations. And so We reached out to the individuals that serve on a handful of individuals that serve on the Addiction Counseling Advisory Committee. Additionally, I worked with a couple members of the board, and there were other individuals from different groups, such as the Kansas Association of Addiction Professionals and others who attended a meeting with the original advocates for that bill. Ultimately, we had a meeting and a second hearing. Well, the hearing did not occur that first time, but another date was planned for the hearing to take place. And so in preparation for that hearing, we had a big meeting with all the stakeholders and the advocates to see if there could be some alternate proposal. Ultimately, our effort to find some common ground on another proposal was unsuccessful, partially because this is a very complex issue. Not only does it involve making sure that the board's interest in protecting the public is taken care of, but there's also the issue of if new levels of licensing are created, would those levels be reimbursable by the Department for Aging and Disability Services? And would there be individuals that would fit into those categories sufficient to actually meet the needs of the stakeholders and advocates and other issues too? And so we had a conversation with the chair of the House Health and Human Services Committee in terms of being unable to come to consensus on an alternate proposal. We also had some preliminary conversations on perhaps would there be a way to expand who could be covered under the student temporary licensed addiction counselor license as a way to enhance workforce and allow more people to be able to provide services and facilities. But ultimately, no conclusion could be reached. The chair of the committee was unhappy, but was receptive to all of the individuals working together. And he also wanted to make sure that the members of the public were not endangered. And so what he asked for was for the individuals to come together. And we agreed to continue to work together with a goal of having perhaps a consensus position by the end of July 2026. And so we have the structure in place for addiction counselor experts on our Addiction Counseling Advisory Committee to discuss some of these topics. The Addiction Counseling Advisory Committee has met once. That committee will meet again in June. You all as board members, we will have another board meeting in July and also in May. So this is a topic the board can discuss, but it was an unusual set of events and circumstances, but there were productive and positive conversations working back and forth. So I just wanted to circle back around to all of you before I go through the rest of the updates in the report. I'll go ahead and pause here. Do you have any questions on House Bill 2506 or any questions about maybe the process moving forward? Okay. Well, if not, like I said,
Looks like Jen might.
yes. Was there a question?
David, just to clarify, now that it's back in discussion, the chances of that bill going through this year seem pretty remote. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And I have a little bit of an update when we get to committee reports on what we're doing from here.
Okay, great. Yeah, and just kind of a clarification. So each legislative session, the legislature meets for 90 days. The legislature does have 2-year sessions called basically a biennium. And so there are bills that are introduced the first year, and then there are bills that also are introduced the second year. If a bill does not, we use the term die, but if a bill does not die because of a legislative rule, it can survive from the first year to the second year of a 2-year session. But ultimately, at the end of the second year, which is what we're in right now, all the bills that would still be alive that were not acted upon will go away. So as of right now, since that bill has not had a hearing, it has not passed at least one chamber, it is unlikely the contents of that bill would be unable to move forward this year. Now, the concept or something similar could emerge in the form of a new bill next legislative session, but at least as far as House Bill 2506, it is very unlikely that it would go forward this year. But we've had really good conversations with different stakeholders and advocates. I think we've also had a good opportunity to work with members of the legislature to explain the complexities. Definitely the board has been very active the last few years to address issues regarding workforce shortages in the mental health profession. But this bill did have some problems. Even the advocates who had requested the bill acknowledged that. And so it is good that we have an opportunity to continue to work with them and have additional conversations to come to a resolution to make sure that we accomplish the goals. Concerning some other legislative updates regarding the BSRB budget, every state agency submits a budget in the fall that is reviewed by the governor's division of budget. The legislature the last couple of years has been working to be proactive on a budget process and hear budgets very early. And so traditionally in most years, the budget committees start the review of budgets the first week in February. This year they started it back at the first week in January. And so the House has passed their budget bill. It's House Bill 2434. It includes the amounts that we had requested on behalf of the BSRB. We don't receive any money from the state general fund, but the legislature does set a limit on how much we can spend. We propose a limit and then they can make adjustments from that. So the limits that we had proposed are what's included in that budget bill. Additionally, the Senate has a similar budget bill. It is Senate Bill 315. And last week, Senate Bill 315 was passed by the Senate on the Senate floor. Essentially, once the House and Senate each pass a budget, they are generally able to start conferencing on the budget. And so I expect the conference committee will begin to look at items of difference and come to a conclusion here in the very near future. And then the legislature really has a choice. They could do what they have done in most years, which would be finalize most of their action, come back in about 3 weeks, which is called the omnibus period. And during that omnibus period, there is revenue estimating, there is human service caseload estimating, and then they could come back and pass maybe a cleanup or a follow-up budget bill. They don't have to. So if the legislature does choose to wrap up all of their action at the end of the current work time period, that's another option by the legislature. So this week coming up, I expect them to spend most of their time either debating bills on the floor or working in conference committees. So there's not that many meetings scheduled for committees that are still having meetings. There is one item of note that I've been continuing to track, and that is House Bill 2528. It's a bill that involves the Board of Nursing and involves some of their operations concerning some individuals that had licenses that had expired and whether or not they had adequately informed them their licenses were going to expire, some of their operating processes concerning renewals, reinstatements, some past disciplinary complaints and things like that. That bill did pass the House, and it is scheduled for a hearing this Thursday in the House or Senate Health and Human Services Committee. The Senate Public Health and Welfare Committee that meets at 8:30 a.m. on Thursday this morning or Thursday this week. And a number of other bills we have talked to you about this session. Most of those bills are not moving forward. There was a bill that looked at DEI topics as it was related to education. The initial bill where that was included is not moving forward this year, at least that's what it appears. However, some of that language does appear to be included as a proviso in the House appropriations bill. So if you are curious on tracking that, the budget processes may be the best place to track some of that language. Some of the other items that were referred, there is a bill that would add certain ministers who provide counseling to mandatory reporting. That has passed the House. That is available to be heard and possibly worked in the Senate, but I have not heard anything further on that bill. There was also a bill that would have provided social workers who work for attorneys with the ability to keep information confidential if it was obtained under attorney-client privilege. That bill was heard. It was similar to a bill that received a hearing and was voted out of committee favorably last year. But I have not heard any further movement on that bill. So I think it is unlikely that bill is going to move forward this session as well. So But as you can see, from my report, been very active meeting with different groups. There are a number of upcoming meetings that will be happening. In the near future, there will be an opportunity to meet with regulators for states that license behavior analysts. So board member Linda Heisman Powell and I will be attending that meeting with representatives from different states. Additionally, there is the mid-year meeting for the Association of State and Provincial Psychology Boards. So I'll be attending that meeting with Board Chair David Anderson and Board Member David Stevens. And then Cynthia Schindel will be attending the mid-year meeting or the education meeting with Leslie Allen for the Association of Social Work Boards. And so that'll be coming up as well. So with that, I'll go ahead and end my report. Just make a note that Jason Hess did provide a new update for you in the packet. He's the board's appointee to the Kansas By Sedition Grant Review Board. So he did provide another update based on the recent meetings on January 9th and February 13th. But with that, I will end my report and stand for any questions.
Thank you, Dave. Any questions for Dave? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to updates from the 2026 annual meeting of the American Association of State Counseling Boards.
Well, I was able to attend this annual meeting with professional counselor and vice chair board member Laura Shaughnessy. The American Association of State Counseling Boards is the national association that provides assistance to regulatory boards that regulate professional counseling. I serve as the treasurer of that board. This was a celebration of a number of years of history for that different association. They brought back a number of past presidents. So that was really helpful to kind of talk to them and get some perspective on some of those different items over the years. I was happy to report based on some things we have done with that association. We're in a good financial position with that association. One of the items I have done as treasurer has been to change some of their investment philosophy so that we are investing in some low risk CDs, and it has brought in some additional revenue so that we have not had to raise the fee for states for the last year. It's looking like it is likely we will not have to raise the fee again next year based on the amount that we're bringing in from that passive revenue. The conference was really a good opportunity to kind of hear some research on disciplinary patterns across different states. There had been some data had been collected in terms of discipline. I think, we're continuing to see our individuals crossing the dual relationship lines, sometimes in a sexual nature, sometimes in a non-sexual nature, but that is a problematic concern. But then there are also some items that are more related to continuing education requirements and some of the other type of rules that states enforce. So I thought the conference overall was really productive. There was also some additional conversation on supervision, and we continued to have conversations about bringing people together to have more standardization on that topic. I'll turn it over to Laura. Laura, if you have any takeaways from the meeting, please feel free to share.
Thank you so much. So we have two things I'll mention. One is that David Fye continues to be respected and sought after on a national basis because of what he brings. And so it was really, again, another opportunity to watch how much he is valued and respected by the AASCB. And regarding ethics violations, we attended a couple of breakouts that had really good conversation around some creative ways to get counselors involved in a process that helps them deal more deeply and more directly with their ethics violations. So I'll be sharing that at the advisory committee at our next meeting. It was really a valuable experience, and I'm really glad we went. It was really valuable. Thank you.
Anything else? All right. We'll move on to updates on multi-state compacts.
Okay. And I think I'll turn it over to Richard. He serves as commissioner for the SIPAC compact for Kansas. So, Richard, do you have any updates on SIPAC?
So first, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, because I'm having terrible audio issues on my end. I can hear you, but like Yes, the sound isn't great. With respect to SIPAC, there are no significant updates from the larger body. I also sit on the finance committee, and we will be deciding, I believe we are meeting next week on Tuesday to have a discussion about the ways in which we might want to invest the monies that SIPAC has. SIPAC is in a really good position financially, and we want to maximize the investments that the organization has. So I can give you more information about that at our next board meeting in May.
Thank you, Richard. Special counsel and multi-state compact?
Okay, and I'll probably look to Laura as the contact commissioner for Kansas if she has updates on professional counsel.
Sure, just a few updates. First of all, we are in the same situation as most of the member states. We are waiting to work out some of the challenges with the background checks, and then as soon as we have that in place, which David has said we're really, anticipating will be soon, we will be able to go live. That's the big hurdle. There are 3 states that are active: Minnesota, Ohio, and Arizona, and they continue to have counselors joining the compact. So we're very excited to watch them do that. And we're just waiting on the background check. Is there anything else we should add about that, David? That's pretty much it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Social work, multi-state compact.
Okay, and I'll weigh in on this one. I serve as the commissioner for the social work compact. And the social work compact was the latest one to pass in Kansas. The executive council has been working to finalize a contract with Compact Connect, which is the vendor who will be building the data system for the social work compact. Under this compact setup, every state will have the ability to issue multi-state licenses, but we need a repository to keep track of all the social workers that have a home state license in one state that are practicing in the different states. So I think they're close to finishing that contract, and then the data system will be built. I serve as a member of the Rules Committee and the Finance Committee. The Finance Committee is meeting later this week. One of the items that they are going to be starting to put together is figuring out how much money they will need for the ongoing. And Cynthia, I'm getting a little bit of feedback from you. I might go ahead and just mute your screen if that's okay. Okay. For the social work compact, the finance committee has had some conversations as far as how much ongoing staff will be needed for the compact commission once the compact is operational. And so at a minimum, we will need an executive director for the compact. All of the other compacts have an executive director who at least splits their time, perhaps in other capacities, but we will need at least an executive director in addition to the ongoing legal services and other supports. So I think one of the finance committee responsibilities will be figuring out how much that person should be paid, and then figuring out how to move forward with recommending some position description responsibilities. So that'll be one of the things. There's also going to be a discussion about clerical staff, if that person can handle all the duties initially, or if they're going to need some additional support. The cost of the data system hopefully will be known by that meeting as part of what they're working on in terms of finalizing the contract. But ultimately, a lot of the current financing is being provided by a HRSA grant, which was obtained by the representatives from the Association of Social Work Boards. And they are provided some additional ongoing financing costs right now. But when the compact does go live, ultimately, they will want this compact to be sustainable based on the individuals holding multi-state licenses. So moving forward on that front, in terms of the rules committee, one of the items that I will be pushing for as a member of the rules committee, when SIPAC became a compact, there was essentially a grace period for states to get in place a background check requirement. And I think that was a very helpful rule. It had to be something that was put in place by the commission that basically said, for states that don't currently have a background check requirement, we will put something in place and give you a certain window of time to make arrangements with the federal government and the state level individuals to run those background checks for you. But we will allow your state licensees to participate under the compact while that's getting worked out. And so if we can pass a rule like that with a certain window of time, that will allow the social work compact to launch successfully with a lot of different states. So that is something that I'll be talking to the rules committee about. There's a couple other more technical rules that will need to be worked out over the next few months, but that's a big thing for the rules committee update coming up.
Thank you, Dave. Any questions for Dave on that? All right, we'll move on to update from national associations, starting with the Association of Social Work Boards.
Yeah, and so I'll provide the update on behalf of ASWB. So ASWB is the association that helps regulatory boards for state regulatory bodies that license social workers in the United States, and also Canadian provinces and territories. And basically, we are in a time of transition. ASWB is launching a new version of the social work licensing examinations that will happen in August of 2026. There is a news article on the front page of the BSRB website talking about that information. There are also a series of webinars that have been put out by ASWB, one for each of the different licensing levels. They describe it as demystifying the licensing process. And so I attended one that was for bachelor's social work, but there's going to be one for master's, one for clinical, and then one for the advanced generalist licensing examination. But those are about one per week. And there will likely be more information about that on ASWB's website. And like I mentioned, the ASWB mid-year meeting or the education meeting is coming up in the near future. So we'll have representatives bring back information from those meetings.
Okay, thank you, Dave. The Association of State and Provincial Psychology Boards.
And this is another group that will have its mid-year meeting. It's actually the same meeting date, the same week as the ASWB mid-year meeting. So ASPPB is meeting the same week for their mid-year. And one of the new updates there is ASPPB is considering having a new licensing examination. They're exploring the possibility of whether there should be a separate exam for master's level psychologists. And so they're collecting feedback on that. Currently, right now, there is the EPPP. There's been a lot of conversations about the EPPP2 and a task force that is currently working on merging a lot of the items together. But there's been also a lot of conversation about what should the scope of practice be for individuals that hold a master's level license. Should they practice under supervision? Can they practice independently if they get to a certain level? And states have a wide variety of terminology and scope of practice. So one of the new items is collecting feedback on that. There is also the Association of, or the American Psychological Association, APA, that is putting together a draft model licensing act, and that is out for public comment. I believe that may have just closed. But they have talked about sort of some defined terms and scope of practice for certain different types of practitioners. And so that is also out there for review. So just kind of wanted to highlight that. I think ASPPB has had a webinar or at least one public forum, a town hall meeting perhaps on that topic. And there's additional information on ASPPB's website. So that information is available if individuals have questions.
Thank you, Dave. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll move on to staff reports. Leslie?
Well, as always, the numbers for the licensees that we have, is in the board packet. But I wanted to ask, the board to consider this. We have been having several applications. Some of ours, professions use the quarter system or use the semester credit hours as 2. Some professions require 3-hour courses. And people who take quarter hours have to take more in order to make it to be a 3 semester credit hour course. And I don't know the history. I don't know why some professions only require 2 and some require 3, but it has become a problem with the psychopathology course. There are credited programs specifically in social work that require a 3-quarter-hour course, which meets their requirements, and they graduate, and then they don't meet hours. And so I was wondering about, maybe the board or the committee's thinking about having a required course, and it could be no less than this amount instead of having the 3 and 2. If that was an optional thing that the professionals would be.
So who would need to change that? Would social workers, counselors?
Counselors actually only require 2 credit hours. So, I mean, I was thinking like for the psychopathology, maybe, a course that is no less than, 2 credit hours or 3/4 or whatever, just something that would make it so that people who come from programs aren't having to, they've already taken a course, but they're having to retake it. And it's not a course where you can usually find like 1 credit hour and add to it. So that it would be the other professions besides professional counseling that it would affect.
So you're suggesting that go to the advisory committees for some feedback?
Yes.
Okay.
So that's all I.
Okay.
Do we
Thank you.
need to make a motion on that to support Leslie?
This is being referred to the advisory committees, so we could just have the advisory committees included as a discussion topic. But I do want to say, if you have not looked at your chart in terms of the number of licensees, we did cross over a pretty big number. We are now over 17,000 permanent licenses overseen by the board. So we've seen a steady increase over the years. But to my knowledge, that is the highest number of individual licenses the board has ever overseen. So 17,000 is a pretty big number. So I just kind of wanted to share that with you. We may post something on the website just to kind of put a spotlight on that, but really happy to see that many people engaged in the mental health professions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's really up when you look back just a decade ago where it was 12,000. All right, thank you, Leslie. We'll go to the complaint review committee report. I know Mary's not here, so Cindy.
In your information, there are statistics that we gather each month regarding the complaints the board receives, and the decisions made by the complaint review committee. At the end of February, we received 158 cases for fiscal year 2026, which puts us slightly behind where we were for the same time for fiscal 2025. Just to share some information for fiscal 2016, which was 10 years ago, for the entire fiscal year, we received 137 cases for the entire fiscal year, just to share the growth that we've had and the number of complaints over that time.
Questions or comments from board members?
Like what percent of the licensees is the complaints? Has the percent of complaints stayed the same, or is the percent of licensees growing? Because if it's the percent of our licensees, if it's growing, then I wonder if we talk about something we could do as a board to provide training or education for our licensees or how to avoid a complaint or, something.
Yeah, I don't know that I can do the math real quick, but I do know that about 10 years ago, we were looking at about 12,000 permanent licensees, and now we're up to about 17,000. So we've seen an increase about 50% or so.
Which is more than, because we've only grown 5,000, 50% would be 6,000 plus.
And we've just started recently, at the request of a board member to track the final column on the cases open, the second sheet, the cases open by licensees. There's a column that says RAVs per licensees, and we haven't kept that. 10 years ago, we didn't keep that column. That was done at a request, and so we don't have that. We could do that information for you for 10 years ago, but we don't have that statistic available. Dave talked about earlier about going to the outreach that we do to colleges, and I think that based on the interviews that we do with people, from our perspective as investigators, I think that is valuable because we talk to people that state that they didn't realize some of the things that we investigate, that this was a violation. Some of the things were a violation. Not all of them, that this is not something that they learned.
Right.
Also, Linda, I do know that like at our advisory committee, we talked about this issue and we're going to have at our next advisory committee meeting a discussion about the types of complaints that are made and look at the statistics for our licensees specifically. So I would recommend that other advisory groups do that as well.
I think that's a great idea. I would like to definitely do that in my advisory committee.
Cindy, anything else?
No, not at this time. But if anyone ever wants to contact me or contact Dave in particular, we're always available.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from board members? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to professions reports, starting with licensed psychology.
Good morning again. Licensed Psychology met on Tuesday, the 10th of February, 2026 at 6 p.m. We had guest speakers from Texas on board to talk a bit about an alternative licensure exam to the EPPP, and we discussed a number of concerns under new business with respect to things like the cost of such an examination and who would construct the examination and how the examination will be constructed. This is not something that has taken full form, and I'm sure that there will be continued discussions about the potential construction of an alternative examination to the EPP. We also continued our review of the draft report of licensees. We also had a discussion that was really productive and robust about artificial intelligence, and we made a couple of decisions to recommend to the full body regarding regarding consent to use AI in sessions and the ability to opt out. I think there will be there will be further discussion on this matter, and our next our next meeting will be the second Tuesday in April at 6 p.m. And I don't have that in front of me right now.
Thank you, Richard. Any questions for Richard? Seeing none, we'll move on to social work.
Yeah, the Social Work Advisory Committee met on February 3rd, and we had a discussion about the transition happening in the National Association of Social Workers, which recently halved the number of state executive directors, and we are now at the Kansas NESW chapter is now being directed by the Iowa chapter director. So we have been able to have a couple of meetings with the board of NESW and Andrea and myself and David, and to try to collaborate and just keep apprised of how they're managing this transition, particularly through the legislative session, which was kind of the largest area of activity for the Kansas chapter of NESW. So I think those have been productive discussions. Where the future is not clear at this point, but we're going to be continuing to try to meet with the NESW board president monthly to keep aware of what's happening in that area. We also talked about the survey of licensees. We reviewed several of the questions. That is just a really rich resource of information that I think we're very fortunate to have from our statewide practitioners. So we'll be continuing to review those answers and look for any changes that we may want to propose as a result of those. And then we also did a review of some regulations, our ongoing review as required that all of our license groups have to do every couple of years. And I think, did we finish it, David, or do we still have a few more to do?
I think we finished the regulation review.
I thought we did, yes. Okay. And our next meeting will be on April 7th.
Thank you, Cynthia. Any questions? All right, we'll move on to professional counseling.
Good morning. Professional counselors met in the advisory committee on February 2nd. Excuse me. We did updates on the professional counseling compact course. We reviewed discussion of the survey of licenses. We went into discussion on artificial intelligence, that ongoing conversation. We decided that we are going to focus on what AI is being used for client care, making sure that there's an opt-out and an informed consent whenever we are in the room with the client. Confidentiality is the priority for our clients, and we want to make sure that's protected. So those are the things we're really focused on. New business, we discussed coursework requirements for 102-3-3A. We also discussed advisory committee discussion topics going on in the incoming months for the rest of the year. And our next meeting will be April 6th. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Any questions? Master's level psychology. We met on February 4th. We had an update from Dr. Brooke Mann at Fort Hays State University on the APA's work towards accreditation of master's level programs. We too continued to review and discuss the draft survey report of licensees. Had some discussions as it was clear to us that there are some folks that don't really understand what BSRB does and does not have authority over. We continue to do a review of regulations, particularly KAR 1024-14, which has to do with consulting with a physician. We also had continuing discussions on the regulation of AI, and like other groups, talked about the importance of informed consent, protecting confidentiality, and the ability to for clients to opt out. We continued a discussion on alternative pathways to licensure. And as I mentioned before, we're going to spend some time educating the committee on areas that are most common for complaints to be lodged against LMLP, LCPs, and also educate them on the complaint review process here at BSRB. Our next meeting is scheduled for April 1st. Marriage and family therapy, but did you want to provide an update on that?
Sure.
Okay.
Mary is at the Capitol this morning. So on behalf of the Marriage and Family Therapy Advisory Committee, that committee did meet. They spent time discussing artificial intelligence and the regulation of artificial intelligence. They had a discussion about proposed recommendations, and there was support for some language concerning confidentiality of information, as well as informed consent. But there was some back and forth discussion as far as an opt-out requirement and whether certain facilities may get to a point to where it wouldn't be practical or feasible for them to remove artificial intelligence, perhaps if it is so deeply included in their processes. And so they wanted to continue to discuss those topics. And so they didn't come up with a recommendation at this time, but they wanted to continue to discuss those. There's also been an ongoing conversation about safety of licensees. And one of the ways that the committee talked about approaching that potentially was looking at the unprofessional conduct regulations. And as the regulations currently exist, or the continuing education regulations. As the continuing education regulations currently exist, it talks about what items would qualify for credit and then how many as a limit for a certain time period. And then it specifically spells out certain things that would not count for credit. And essentially, if you have a general job related training that traditionally doesn't qualify, but we also talked about how social workers are the only profession that has a mandatory safety training requirement. The committee talked about, could there be a mandatory requirement for marriage and family therapists for safety training? And while it was looked at as a valuable thing, making it a requirement seemed unlikely. So the committee talked about perhaps adding some language to the continuing education that might allow for some hours that deal with safety of practitioners as it relates to the marriage and family therapy profession. So that will be discussed in more detail in the future. But good meeting overall. The next meeting had to be moved because of the conflict. So their next meeting will be on Friday, April 24th.
Thank you, Dave. Any questions for Dave? We'll move to addiction counseling.
Good morning, everyone. The Addictions Counselor Advisory Committee has actually met twice since the last board meeting on January 13th and then on last week on March 4th. At the January 13th meeting, we continued review of regulations. And in both meetings, we continued reviewing results of the survey of licensees. Had to do with telehealth, practice-related concerns, AI, which is ongoing, and there was a good discussion about supervision and obtaining supervision that prompted discussion of possibly looking at making a recommendation about requirements for supervisors, similar to the marriage and family therapy and professional counseling professions. We don't have a recommendation at this time. That conversation will be ongoing. And then the bulk of our last, well, not the bulk, but much of our last meeting last week was about House Bill 2506, as David discussed in his report. And David discussed the status of that bill at this time, but we did agree to invite Acadia Healthcare to our next committee meeting. They are very involved in prompting the creation of this possible new license type. And the members of the advisory committee wanted to hear from them directly to find out what it is they're seeking. And David was going to reach out to them to see if they want to come to our advisory committee meeting. And our next meeting is in June, and the date and time are still pending.
Thank you, Jill. Any questions? All right, we'll move to behavior analysis.
Yep, we met in February on Friday the 13th. We talked about, we acknowledged the work that the committee did on the survey of licensees and how we could look at responses to add to our topics of conversation in 2026. Spent quite a bit of time on the regulation of artificial intelligence, which again will be an ongoing topic of conversation. We talked about supervision. Our discipline is kind of wonky with that because we also answer to a different external board. So looking to see how we can marry the two without delegating authority to an external board. We did not talk about the alternative pathways to licensure, since at this point in time, there seems to be relatively little alternative pathways, but that will be an ongoing topic of conversation. There is discussion about the APA draft model, which talked about psychologists being able to implement behavior analysis. There wasn't a lot of time to make comment on that because by the time it came to us, it was, I believe the public comment was almost over. Our next meeting is Friday, April 10th at 1 o'clock and will be hybrid, remote, and in person, I believe.
Thank you, Linda. Any questions? All right, we are scheduled for a 10-minute break, so let's plan to be back at 11:15.
think we're good.
All right. Welcome back, everyone. We'll now move on to the next item on our agenda, old business. Continued review and discussion on changes to unprofessional conduct regulations.
All right, thank you, Dave. And we've been walking through these together, going through the proposed changes to unprofessional conduct. In your packet of material, you have a large grid which shows all of the proposed changes for the different committees as well as existing language. We are ready to start on item number 44. So I will go ahead and share my screen. It was maybe a little challenging to see everything on the screen, but we'll walk through this together, and then we can kind of go from there. Item 44, by the way, is located on page 12. Okay, so I'm sharing my screen here. You should be able to see the language. It is pretty small here. Item number 44 begins with offering to perform or performing any service, procedure, or therapy that, by the accepted standards of addiction counseling practice in the community, would constitute experimentation on human subjects without first obtaining the full, informed, and voluntary written consent of the client or the client's legal representative or representatives. Similarly, the next profession, the language is a little bit different. Offering to perform or performing any service, procedure, treatment, or therapy that, by the accepted standards of applied behavior analysis, practice in the community, constitute experimentation on human subjects without first obtaining the full, informed, and voluntary written consent of the client or the client's legal representative or representatives. There's not an item that matches word for word that from the licensed psychology profession, but there are other examples you can see there for the other professions that are listed, which I believe are master's level psychology, marriage and family therapy, and professional counseling. Professional counseling did recommend after the terms any service, procedure, adding the word assessment. So that was the recommended change there. I'll go ahead and turn it over to you for discussion to see if there's interest in having some uniform language across the professions on this item, or if you have thoughts on some of the specific language or wording, whether there should be different language by professions based on scope of practice, or whether there can be common language here.
Leslie, was there any recommendation from staff on the language?
No believe so.
Yeah, I don't think there was a recommendation from staff on this one.
We're pretty consistent.
So for psychologists, I know that there's a part in regs that have to do with research. And I thought that there was something to this effect when it came to working with human subjects in the research regulation. I don't have it right in front of me.
I thought there was too, Richard. Maybe it's in a different area.
I'm looking now. They have in as in Nora, improperly engaging in research with human subjects, which shall include the following acts: failing to consider carefully the possible consequences for human beings participating in the research, failing to protect each participant from unwarranted physical and mental harm, failing to ascertain the consent of the participant is voluntary and informed, and failing to preserve the privacy and protect the anonymity of the subjects with the terms of informed consent.
That's research specific though? Isn't that how it's?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
for research.
And this is more about service provision.
Mhm.
Leslie, there is E within the psychologist unprofessional conduct regulation, which talks about failing to obtain informed consent. And one of the items is number 3, failing to inform a client when a proposed treatment or procedure is experimental. There's probably some overlap there.
Yeah,
Because experimentation in human stuff with participants, that's a big thing in psychology, right? I mean, that's probably where most of our research training has come out of inappropriate experimentation in the field of psychology, right? I mean, when you look at vulnerable populations, so I'm like surprised we don't have something there.
It looks like that the LMLP one is the only one that doesn't have specific language that references that profession. It just says by the accepted standards of professional practice.
Right.
And that's what we're kind of looking for, right? Something more general that would apply to all.
Yeah.
I would be fine with um not incorporating, but using one of the other's professions language to fill in the gap for psychologists. What I would not want to do too much of though is have things be duplicated. So if there's a way to, and I think that we can talk about this later, but a way to kind of reconcile what could be inserted here for psychologists and what's already in regulation. Because
Yeah.
to the, oh, go ahead, please.
I was just gonna say, I think that's a really good point. We do want to do a reconciliation at the end. We've tried to line these up as much as possible when it's very clear, but there may be some instances towards the end where there are some items that may be close. And so we do want to do reconciliation at the end for sure.
Is the board comfortable with adopting the language as it is under the LMLP? That would be column number 4. As it doesn't specify what profession.
Does that make it though a more difficult thing to actually decide and enforce? I mean, have we ever had a complaint based on this regulation? Do we know?
I might refer to Cindy if she's still on the call.
Yeah, no, not that I recall.
I mean, accepted
But it is
standard.
there for a reason. I mean, I know that it is there for a reason. And so I don't want to discount it. But I am not aware that someone has made that a complaint. Tim, do you have an opinion that if there is more generic language that would make it harder or easier to prove?
Yeah, so I mean, it looks like based on the language, we have to prove first it's outside of, acceptable professional standards for each profession. And then in addition to that it would constitute experimentation. So, my assumption would be that not every thing that falls outside of the accepted standards would be experimentation necessarily. That seems to be a separate thing. And so that ultimately would be what we would have to prove if a complaint of that nature came. And I don't, just like you, Cindy, I don't recall that we've had that issue in the last couple of years.
Is it? I mean, for each one, even if you have the same language, or even if you have the profession, it would still be similar, right?
Are you recommending then that we leave that language?
Well, I was just thinking, I think it's the language around it,
Right.
around the professional title that is important, so. And like behavior analyst wanted to add assessment. I don't know if that's something that the board thinks should be added.
I think that was
Professional counseling.
Oh, professional, sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm fine with adding assessment.
Yeah,
Yeah, as well. Yeah, I think that would be a good addition.
okay. Is there consensus then to go ahead and use the general language but add the word assessment?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, looks like there's consensus, so we'll go ahead and move that one on for 44. And I'll share my screen again. And now we'll go to item number 45. Basically, it says practicing, and then it has the different references to the profession after one's license expires. And so the statute clearly says what things would fall under the scope of practice of someone who held a professional license. But I think for most of these professions, there is a specific unprofessional conduct item that specifically calls out practicing after a license is expired. So is there any objection from anyone as far as using sort of general language and also including that for licensed psychology as well?
I would be fine with doing that.
Okay. Any objections to that or any other questions or comments? Okay, looks like there's consensus to go ahead and move that item forward as well. Moving to the next item that starts on the next page, that would be item 46. Says using without a license or continuing to use after a license has expired any title or abbreviation defined by regulation. So in other words, a title protection type of a regulation. There's a little bit different language for master's level psychology, which says using without a license or continuing to use after the expiration of a license any title or abbreviation prescribed by law or used solely by persons currently holding that license or class of license. And I think most of these are pretty similar.
Looks like the social work one says title or abbreviation prescribed by the board as opposed to prescribed by law or reg.
That's a difference. That's great.
Which of those do you all prefer?
And this may be a good question for Tim as well.
Yeah.
Tim, do you have feedback on that one?
Yeah, I would think you'd want to defer to what your licensing acts say, the statutes, not necessarily regulation. I want to say that the various licensing acts specifically refer to the titles, acronyms that can be used. And so I would think that that's where you would want to take this, would be to specifically refer to what the legislature has prescribed for each discipline. So if the fourth column over is that LMLPs, where it talks about a title or abbreviation prescribed by law, I like that language as opposed to defined by regulation because you're referring to what the statute says, what the legislature has identified regarding the titles that can be used.
Andrea, do you have a question or comment?
Oh, I was just saying that makes sense. What I was saying.
Oh, that's a big catch.
Okay. Is there consensus to use general language but include it as described by law?
So
Yes.
one thing with respect to psychologists, that field for us is blank. And I'm thinking of scenarios where, like in a rare instance, where a developmental psychologist or a social psychologist might say to someone that they are a psychologist and they didn't put the descriptor before it, would those psychologists if this were applied to psychologists, would those particular psychologists be would be putting themselves out as a psychologist without having taken the the ETRP or whatever? Would those folks be disciplined in this instance?
Well, call themselves a licensed psychologist.
So yes, if they call themselves a licensed psychologist, that would be one thing. But because we don't have a clinical level, if they said that they were a psychologist, I think that I'm kind of answering my question as I kind of talk this through, that if it would be okay that they would put themselves out as a psychologist, but they can't say that they are a licensed psychologist.
I think that's correct.
And I know at least one of those is exempted from the Licensure Act and the Construction of Act.
Okay. Yeah, then I would be fine with that.
Okay, is there consensus? Anybody opposed to having this be somewhat uniform, but making reference to what is prescribed in law?
Yes.
Okay, looks like there's consensus, so we'll move forward on that item. Moving next to item 47, and this is only listed for 3 professions, so there may be something that is maybe different for the other professions, or it did not appear in the same way. But item 47 says violating any provision of the Licensure Act or any implementing regulation. Looks like it is listed for master's level psychology, marriage and family therapy, and addiction counseling.
Feels like it should be listed for all, in my opinion. It's a good catch-all that reiterates with everything else in the document.
Yeah.
Isn't that duplicative? Do we need that?
Yes. That's a good question. Tim, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this one. Does it need to be spelled out explicitly for the other professions?
Yeah, so I don't know this with 100% certainty, but I feel fairly confident that the disciplinary statute and the various acts contains a provision that says this much. And so there would be a basis for discipline, whether or not, I guess the question is whether or not you want to, make that conduct unprofessional conduct. The board would have the ability to discipline, on that basis under the disciplinary statute. So that's probably the policy question for the board, is whether, that needs to be prescribed as unprofessional conduct in addition to what the disciplinary statute says.
I'm thinking of what's happened with the nursing board and how they've are addressing some regulations that were considered unprofessional conduct that they're now trying to take out of that category. I don't know if what this would apply to that could potentially be seen as overreach for us to be disciplining people for. Like the nursing board, it was being, late on renewing the license. And this new law they're trying to get through eliminates that as unprofessional conduct. So I don't know about adding things to unprofessional conduct above and beyond what we already have.
Tim, is this where we get in where we use some of the things that are definitions that aren't explicitly used as unprofessional conduct, where we have, can you provide an example of how we use this in some of the
Yeah.
orders?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of I'd call it a catch-all. If we don't have a specific instance of unprofessional conduct, but there is a violation of the act. I mean, the most common I think that we run into is someone who, practices without a license, uses the title holding out. Those would be probably the most typical scenarios where someone has violated a provision of the act itself. And there could be some others that are more nuanced. But that's what it is. It's more or less a catch-all. You have it in your disciplinary statute, so it is covered from that perspective if someone were to, violate the various provision of the licensing acts. And so there is a basis to pursue discipline there. Cynthia, I think you raise a really interesting point about, the scope of unprofessional conduct. I don't think that, if you look at the bill that pertains to the nursing board, there are certain types of violations that I think the legislature is speaking to. I don't think that this is a type that is covered in that bill. I would have to go back and look at it specifically, but from my review, it's been a week or so. I don't remember that type of violation being in, the period of time that they're looking to pull back violations.
So if somebody's practicing without using the title and practicing without a license, they can't be held accountable for unprofessional conduct because they're not a professional.
It would be likely when they submit an application
license.
it would likely would be if they submitted an application for licensure or something along those lines that would give the board jurisdiction to then act. But you're right. During the time period they're not licensed, there's not necessarily jurisdiction in most situations.
But if somebody applies for license, they place themselves under professional conduct rules, right? During their application. Yes. And if it's found that they were practicing already using the license or using the title, we would discipline them for that delay. I mean, is that what this would allow?
The potential for that
we already
exists.
Have that.
Yeah, the potential for that exists. I don't know that that's necessarily common practice. Cindy, I think you're typically working those out through diversion type agreements. But yeah, certainly the possibility exists. And if you have someone who has, done that type of thing for years, you may look at that differently than a short period of time and an oversight mishap.
So Tim, do you think it makes sense to have that language in there?
I think only if the board wants to deem, a violation of the act unprofessional conduct, and I think it's a pretty broad stroke. Um, it is covered by your disciplinary statutes. And so in the event that that occurs, there is a basis for discipline or some sort of remedial action by the board. Yeah, I think I'm sorry, I'm not necessarily answering your question, but I would call it more of a policy consideration if the board wants to deem, a violation of the act unprofessional conduct. Otherwise, it's covered.
Well, would that give us any additional authority or uh, oversight that would keep the public safer? That goal.
Cynthia, you were breaking up. Your connection is lagging a little bit.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm out of the country. I was saying, would this give us any additional authority or oversight that would help us keep the public safe? Do we need this to have the ability to deal with some of those situations?
No,
Did
the
that
ability
come through?
exists. Yes, it did, Cynthia. The
Okay.
ability exists,
Okay.
within your disciplinary statutes. A violation of the act is a basis for discipline under your disciplinary statutes. And so the suite of remedial sanctions that are available for a violation such as that are available if it's under your disciplinary statute or if it's unprofessional conduct under regulation, which is then covered in the disciplinary statute. I think it's more of whether or not the fact of a violation of the act constitutes unprofessional conduct that you have to consider.
And just to let you know that for those of you that are remote, we have sort of a working lunch that we're going to be doing through the last hour of the meeting. So any board members here in the room, feel free to grab something to eat. We have some pizza here, but we're going to continue the meeting so we can keep working through. And any staff members who want to come in, you're welcome to that too.
They labeled it. These are the cheese sticks. They didn't label them, but everything else is labeled.
Okay.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Ashley, will you bring a knife just in case some of it's not
Oh, there should be something.
a sharp knife?
No, what do you, like an actual knife?
It's Cynthia.
What I hear is that it can be considered redundant since we have disciplinary statutes that will cover anything. It sounds like it might be redundant. Is that what I hear?
I think
I
that's
mean,
fair.
the harm of having an unprofessional conduct finding, of course, that's what led to the whole nursing board issue, is because it became more called for to license somewhere else or to get relicensed, et cetera. Be careful about what we call unprofessional conduct and how many, I mean, there's already a whole lot of.
Oh,
Oh,
sorry.
no.
Cynthia, she was breaking up and then she dropped off the call. It was like she may be back.
So have you
Sorry.
used this? Have you used this, Tim, in any of the orders that you've written? Since we have this with 3 licenses, have you used this in any this?
I don't recall specifically,
Okay.
Cindy, if
Okay.
we have used a violation of the act or a rule or regulation of the board as a basis. My typical approach is to defer to the statute. And so I would say, without going back and looking at all the orders, that would be my assumption, is that I'm citing the statute and not necessarily the unprofessional conduct regulation. But it's an either or. I mean, the language is virtually the same. The effect is the same between the statute and then this provision of the unprofessional conduct regulations.
Maybe that might be helpful, is that we already have statutory authority to do it. And okay.
Yeah.
So it seems like there's not consensus to go ahead and add this.
Yeah.
So do you want to keep this the way that it is? Alternatively, it could be struck, so.
It sounded like maybe removing it. Is everybody all right with that? Looks like that.
Okay, next consensus. Thank you. Let's move on. The next item is a fairly large one. So let's skip item 47 or 48. It's going to be in a separate appendices that you'll receive later. Item 49 is the next one we can take a look at together. Item 49 is only listed for 3 of the professions. And that language says failing to provide copies of reports or records to a licensed healthcare provider authorized by the client following a licensee's receipt of a formal written request, unless the release of that information is restricted or exempted by law or by this article of the board's regulations, or the disclosure of the information will be injurious to the welfare of the client. And it looks like there's fairly similar language between licensed psychologist, master's level psychologist, and
The BA.
yes, the behavior analyst were the first item, the first individuals who had this. So what are your thoughts on item 49? I guess the language is slightly different. For the psychologist, it says ignoring client welfare, which shall include the following acts, and then it has some of those said. Failing to provide copies of records or records to a licensed healthcare provider authorized by the client following the licensee's receipt of a formal written request, unless the release of that information is restricted or exempted by law or by these regulations, or the disclosure of the information will be injurious to the welfare of the client.
Oh, it went away.
Sorry, I was turning it to all of you to have discussion, but I can bring it back up on my screen. Okay.
I bet folks don't know this is unprofessional conduct. Since we were talking about educating people more about what unprofessional conduct entails.
I'm pretty sure that behavior analysts have it in here because there were some complaints that were filed with the behavior analyst certification board before our licensing law went into effect, where there were clinicians that were refusing to turn over records, which help with patient care, right? And so that's one of the reasons why we made sure this was in ours. I think it's important because when there's information in historical documentation that could potentially benefit current and future care, I think it's important that those records follow the client. I think that's the intent of this.
I think that for psychologists, and if I might speak for the master's level psychologist in this too, that that this is included in particular because of psychological testing.
Yeah.
This is a this screens testing and not handing over the report or not handing over the raw data, which has implications with copyright matters and individuals who are not trained to interpret or analyze raw data. That this is put in place to indicate that no, these cannot be sent over because the person doesn't have adequate training and
right.
doesn't have adequate training to review those things. And I know David Dave Anderson, I spoke for the Master's Level Psychologist, but I would wonder if you would concur with that.
Yeah, I think that's probably accurate, Richard.
I have a question about the wording under the master's level psychologist, which the way I'm interpreting it, it says failing to provide each client or the client's legal representative, where the other two say failing to provide the records to a licensed healthcare provider. So I wonder if, would you want to include client or the client's legal representative in addition to the licensed healthcare provider?
I will just give some history right now, just based on the number of complaints that I have, is that our understanding is that psychologists are different. And so I think that's what Richard was trying to say, that this screams psychological testing, is that psychologists are different. And that you treat theirs differently, and that they have that it has to go to another that the healthcare provider can request it and not the client, that there is a distinction with psychologists and it goes healthcare provider to healthcare provider. And that is our understanding of how that they have a separate duty for psychologists, and it can go healthcare provider to healthcare provider. And they have a separate protection for psychologists.
Yeah, I guess I'm just stuck on the fact that that the psychologist one's focusing on failing to provide each client or the client's legal representative, and the other two are the failing to provide the licensed healthcare provider. So Cynthia, are you saying that that's because psychologists are different?
Yes, that's what I was trying to say, like Richard was trying to say, and I said it a different way, that there is a certain protection for them. And that was our understanding based on the history, was it was healthcare provider to healthcare provider to protect the information. And if that is incorrect, but that is how was the history of that protection, is that was healthcare provider to healthcare provider, that you can have this if you're a healthcare provider.
Like the raw data.
The raw, yes.
Right, but the report should be able to be distributed to the client to be able to take to the school or wherever else, right? They're entitled to that report from the original administrator, but the raw data should not be distributed to anybody that is not qualified to receive those data.
And with respect to clients, to that end, the last phrase there, or the disclosure welfare of the client, that can also be interpreted as, the client, if they receive the information in some way, it would be deleterious or injurious to the health or the welfare of that person. And I think that there have been cases where that would be the case, if they sent the report in full, and unabbreviated or unabridged to the client, that could have certain ramifications for the client's emotional well-being.
Doesn't HIPAA require it though anyway? That clients have a right to all of their medical records and all of their
Yes.
mental health care records.
Yes.
We have to produce them. So that kind of trumps this anyway.
And this, I think, it speaks to, say, a conversation that a psychologist might have with the client. Like, yes, you're indeed right, Cynthia, that by HIPAA, you are entitled to this, and can you come in for a conversation? Because I really think that if I release all of this to you, it might be confusing, or there might be things that could be misinterpreted. But yes, you are right.
Gonna say that though? Do you wanna say what you said?
Oh, well, but we can't discipline based on HIPAA. I mean, if it's not, we can't just say HIPAA requires for the disciplinary action anyway. I think though.
But
what
if we're
Geneva-
disciplining someone, if we're disciplining a practitioner for something that is required that they do by federal law, I mean, do we want to do that? Do we want to have a regulation in place or a law in place that can allow something that the federal law requires? I mean, do we have other circumstances like that where there's some conflict, or that there's some ability to withhold information that is not
HIPAA's
there in
really
federal law?
HIPAA's really
Right.
complicated, and there's different interpretations of what, and so not to discuss it here, but there's what are psychotherapy notes, and are they required
Right.
to be disclosed under HIPAA? And so I don't want to say here or what is required to be disclosed under HIPAA. And so that's really a complicated discussion. And so there's what is best practice. And so, and we
Right.
don't enforce federal law, and federal law can change. And so I think what the board was trying to do at that time, not now, was do what best practice was.
Mhm.
And so,
Okay.
and so that's just a short thing. But I think one of the things that comes up over and over again is psychotherapy notes. And so I think that's just an example. And so we don't keep HIPAA in our head because it's really complicated and it's evolving.
Right.
And also we do best practice, what is best practice and what is in the best interest of the client,
Does it
which is
make sense?
often a child not related to the person who's requesting it.
Does it make sense to refer this back to the advisory committees to look at? I mean, in terms of what, Richard talked about, I'm sure some of this stuff was done quite a while ago. Might make sense to relook at it.
Mhm.
I'd be fine with that.
Yeah, and to just speak to what Cynthia was saying is there's a standard of practice in Epic Notes where there are therapy notes, psychotherapy notes, but then there are private clinician notes. And the private clinician notes are where you put the things that might be deleterious to a client's mental health or well-being. Whereas the psychotherapy notes are just in general, how did the session go and what did you discuss? Right? Just like we discussed challenges
Yeah.
that they have with custody,
I'm
constraints
aware
or
of
what.
that distinction, but as Cindy said, the law evolves and changes. That's the current interpretation that allows
Yeah.
therapists to keep some of those notes private, but we don't
Yeah.
know whether that'll be tomorrow.
Yeah, I was trying to support what both you guys said.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, let's refer this back for discussion. And then probably we'll need to end our review of the regulations so we can make sure we get to the other topics in the
Sure.
agenda. But I did notice the next several are exclusive to the behavior analyst profession. So when we pick this up again, we can talk about those. There's a number of others that involve most professions, and they tend, at least a set of them tend to tie into the mandatory reporting obligations. So some of that language we may want to take a look at to make sure all the professions and license types are covered in those statutes. If we want to consider expanding to other professions or changing some of that language. But then there's a few others that involve most professions that deal with confidentiality and things like that. So I think we're working through a few of them that are really complicated right now, but I think some of these will go a little bit faster once we get to the mandatory reporting ones probably.
Can we bring all these to the next BA advisory committee meeting? Because these map directly onto the ethical requirements of the BACB.
Yeah, we can do that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Didn't they already look at it?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, that takes us to a continued review and discussion of survey reports of licensees.
Okay, so I just wanted to give you an update. I'm working with staff to finalize those reports. We are including executive summary for those, and they'll be distributed soon. We're not quite there yet, but I've met with representatives of the Department for Aging and Disability Services and also some representatives from a group called NASHB, which has been looking at workforce type things. And I had a meeting with them recently and talked about some of the findings from the surveys. So that was a really productive conversation. So we should have more information on this to be coming very soon, but I just wanted to make sure it was included here so that it didn't fall off your radar.
Okay, thank you, Dave. We'll move on then to new business and a review of recommended changes to regulations from advisory committees.
Okay.
Leslie?
And just as a reminder, we did adjust the agenda at the beginning to cover some of the other regulations that were recommended by the Addiction Counseling Advisory Committee. So maybe we can work those in as we go through addiction counseling first. So which one is the first one in order, Leslie?
For addiction counseling, it would be 102-7-3.
Okay. And I will pull that regulation up with the proposed changes and we can take a look at them together. Said it was
102-7-3, right about in the middle. So this is the education regulation for addiction counselors. And in their statutes and regulations are a little different in that if they don't have enough practicum hours, they have no way to become licensed. So it's not like some of the other professions where they can make it up or do additional postgraduate hours. So if you scroll down to the second or third page, it's number 10, C10, I think. There we go. We're just wanting to add language that if they didn't complete 400 clock hours of practice, they can combine that with post-degree work and bring that total up to 400 so that they can become licensed. And then again, in the coursework for master's addiction, they have to have 300 hours of client contact, and we've added language that says or a combined 300 hours of direct client contact and postgraduate supervised experience. So that the total
question,
would be
Leslie?
300. Yes.
So the first part include at least 300 hours of client contact is pretty clear. It's a little bit unclear if the combined 300 hours of direct client contact and additional postgraduate supervised experience, what that postgraduate supervised experience is. Like, I'm of course being like silly here, but what if 298 of the hours were on providing training to as part of your supervised experience or report writing, and only 2 of the hours were direct client contact? I think that negates the intent of the include at least 300 hours of client contact. Of course, this isn't my profession, but
I think it was interpreted to mean that it would be 300 hours of direct client contact. But I see what you're saying now that I'm looking at it,
Yeah,
but of direct client contact, I wonder if there's
Oh,
some way
yeah.
you can reform the sentence.
To say supervised experience. The postgraduate supervised experience, that part of it.
mhm,
Yeah,
That's what you're saying? Yeah.
yeah,
We can adjust the sentence.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you adjust the sentence, yes, Jill and Leslie, to make it clear that the 300 hours is
direct client contact.
Yeah, correct. And it could either be pre or postgraduate supervised experience, right?
Yes. And I
Yeah.
think also that include at least 300 hours of client contact we should add the word direct in front of client because that is defined in
Agreed.
regulations.
Yeah, yeah.
Agree.
That is all the changes in that regulation. The others aren't highlighted, sadly.
Okay, okay. So, given this language and the adjustments that were just described by the members of the board, is there any objection to adopting these by consensus to be moved forward? Okay, looks like there's consensus, so we will make these changes and then send them to the Department of Administration as recommended changes by the board. Okay, let's say the next one is at 102-7-4.
Yes.
Okay. I will share my screen. Okay, this is the regulation on application for licensure.
This one. I don't think there's much until, there we go. So, for the clinical addiction counselor, for other professions, they say that they don't have to submit professional references with their clinical application. So this is adding, if not previously provided to the board, that a LCAC applicant would only have to submit references if they were not licensed as an LMAC and provided those references already. And that would be in line with the other professions.
Are there any other changes?
Scroll down, yeah, sorry. And then, with the application or temporary expiration, we're saying that, they can request a 6-month, extension if there are extenuating circumstances, and I'm adding as defined in KAR 102-7-1, and that points back to the definition regulation, which defines extenuating circumstances. And then if you go down further, it's as defined in that regulation again, and then striking H, because we have the definition repeated, which means if there's any change in the definition, we have to remember to change it in 2 places instead of 1. So that's why that was done that way.
Any questions about this proposed edit to the regulation?
What are some of the reasons that people would have wanted to have their application kept open for another 6 months?
We've had some situations to where someone applied and then as soon as they applied, they became very ill and that affected their ability to take the test. Or if there was a situation to where there was a technical issue where they had scheduled the test and then maybe a power outage or something that was a technical issue why they couldn't take the test that day or something like that. There have been other situations to where if someone was, let's say, a caretaker for someone, and that person became very ill and it impacted their ability to take the test. We've been kind of lenient on that as well, knowing that that would have a severe impact on someone. But it does take an extreme condition or event outside of their control that would make them unable to satisfy the requirement or make it inadvisable. So we do keep up the high standard, but those have been a couple examples.
Okay.
If there's no, is it by consensus that this will move forward? Okay. So there's consensus, so we'll move this forward as proposed change. And just for clarification too, the language allowing the 6-month request to extend it is already there. It's really more about the citation of extenuating circumstances. This ties back to the definition. But they already do have that ability to request the 6 months. And then I believe next is 102-7-4A.
Yes, and this was actually, when the LAC and, when they had, grandparenting, and that has, they're recommending that we revoke this regulation because it's no longer needed. It's for those people that were grandparenting, and that is no longer an option. It's been taken out of the statute. So this regulation is no longer needed.
Okay. Any question on 102-7-4A?
It's straightforward.
Is there consensus to move this forward and revoke this regulation? Okay, I see a lot of head nods. It appears to be consensus, so we will move forward with this as a recommended change by the board to revoke that regulation. So the next is 102-7-4B. And that is application for licensure based on reciprocity. And Leslie, I'll turn it over to you.
So in the beginning, we're just adding master's addiction counselor and adding a statute number, which used to be a reference. And then a lot of language is being stricken because the statutes for reciprocity have changed. It used to be 5 years and then 4 years, and now it's 1 year. So we're just deleting all of that language and saying they have to go down a little, there you go. They have to show that they hold an LAC, an LMAC or LCAC with substantially equivalent standards, and that they have to show they have at least a baccalaureate or a master's degree. Okay, so I added at least a baccalaureate and struck or master's degree, because they could do it with either or. For an addiction counselor, and added master's degree for the master's addiction counselor, and scroll down a little bit more. And they have to, if they don't meet substantially equivalent requirements, they have to show proof that they've held a license, registration, or certification with a similar scope of practice for at least 12 months immediately preceding the application through reciprocity. And I think the rest of the regulation would remain the same.
Okay. I'll stop sharing my screen. Are there any questions about the proposed changes to this regulation? Is there consensus to move this regulation forward as a recommended change by the board? I don't see any objections, so we will note this one as a recommended change to be moved forward by the board. See 102-7-7, renewal and late renewal. So I'll share my screen on this regulation.
So going through these renewal and reinstatement, we've changed it so that it always says reinstatement if they are applying after their license expires. And changing it to if the license has been expired for less than 1 year, they have to pay the renewal fee plus the penalty fee. And I think those are the only changes in that. Yeah.
Unless I believe the statute had at one point talked about a late renewal, but now the statute talks about reinstating.
Yes,
So this matches the regulation to the statute.
yes.
Any questions about 102-7-7? Is there a consensus to move this forward as a recommended change? Okay, appears to be consensus, so we'll move 102-7, 2-7 as a recommended change. 102-7-7. The next one up is 102-7-8. This is about the renewal audit, and I will share my screen here.
And I think we've talked about these in previous professions, but we used to require for audits of continuing education, we required original documents, and now we would prefer that they send us copies. This allows things to be emailed and sent. A lot of trainings are online and you don't have original documents with ink signatures anyway. And then we're adding a section that shows if someone is using CE Broker, because that's the format that has been approved by the board, that we're authorized to go into that system and review the audit materials that way. So the licensee doesn't have to send us the documents.
Any questions about the proposed changes to 102-7-8? Is there consensus to move this forward as a
Should
proposed
we name the provider, or should it just state? Should we name the provider in the regulation, or should we state a provider approved by the board to go in to check the people's, to do the audit?
Yeah, I think it's probably
'Cause, like,
better
for the
to
test.
have it. So in this instance, I think it's better to have it broader, because we could have another vendor that fulfills what CE Broker does. And so if we name CE Broker specifically, then if they change names or we had someone else who could provide this, we would need to adjust the regulation. But using broad language, I think would cover us for this instance and then others.
Okay.
Is there a consensus to move this one forward with the recommended change?
Yes.
Okay. Then we will put this one down as a recommended change by the board. And then the last one is 102-7-12. And this has to do with the reference to the DSM. So I'll share my screen here.
And this is referencing the current DSM, which is the 5th edition, and adding text revision. That's the only change in the regulation because there's a new book.
And this takes care of the TR.
So every time there's a revision, do you have to go in and then?
Every time there's a new book, yes.
So that was going to be my question. Is there a way to say the current edition that is in effect?
Ongoing revisions, ongoing.
The
Yeah.
statute actually requires us to say which one specifically in regulation.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
tell the statute people to get with the
Well, and this does seem to be one of the items where the legislature has wanted to have at least some oversight. But they're having some things in different versions of the DSM that members have taken exception to. So I think this is probably a good one for us to update.
All right, is that all under addiction counseling?
And just to double check, is there consensus to move this one forward?
Yes.
Okay. Then we'll move this one forward as well. Okay.
That takes us to professional counseling.
102-3-3A.
Okay. Thank you. All right, I'll share my screen here. This is just the one for professional counseling. This is the educational requirements for licensure.
And it's on page 2. We talked with the professional counselor advisory committee and looked at the statute. The statute does require that all of the substantive content areas found in this regulation are in statute as well. But because we required a 2-hour course in each area, we are changing the regulation to that if they have a 60 semester credit hour program accredited by KCREP, and they have to have 45 semester credit hours that cover the substantive content areas found in section C below. We're adding that because it will make reviewing of KCREP programs a lot simpler. Currently, if we're not aware of a program, even if they're KCREP accredited, we have to get all the syllabi and then send them for a review. And there are some categories like 1 and 2 that the programs have combined those courses into one course. And that is the only change in this. That everything else, if they're not KCREP accredited, everything else remains the same. It's only the KCREP programs that we're making an adjustment to.
Did
And
there,
our advisory committee had consensus that this was a good idea and we approved it. I'm sorry, what were you gonna say, Linda?
should there be a word that in between hours and cover?
Yes,
So
so
read,
I told Dave this actually, I'm gonna have to rework the whole intro because it says that you have to have this program and then either KCREP or not KCREP. And so I'm gonna have to renumber it and change the wording a little bit, but yes, it should be that.
Okay.
Okay, any questions on the proposed change? Is there consensus to move this proposed change forward?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't see any opposition, so this will be moved forward as a proposed change by the board.
And that was the only one for that group?
That is Illinois Professional Council.
All right, so we go to the social work.
Okay.
1029.
All right. The next one is KAR 102-2-9 for social work. I will share my screen.
Okay, in the lead-in, it's being changed to say who does not meet the requirements of 102-2-B. And that will be the new reciprocity regulation because it used to be in 2 regulations and I'm working on combining them. So they don't have to show that they've passed the exam when they apply through reciprocity. So that's why this language is being added. And then we're striking the criterion reference cutoff score and 1 standard deviation below the national mean. The ASWB says pass or fail. They don't give us the score anymore because states have different required pass points. And so they've just changed it to pass or fail. And then if you scroll down, each application, striking subsection D, because that means they have to send us the fee and we no longer do that. And that's all the changes in that regulation.
Any questions on KAR 102-2-9? Is there consensus to move this regulation forward?
Yes.
Then we will say by consensus, this has been moved forward by the board as a recommended change. Next up is KAR 102 and actually, clarity, Leslie, you said you were working to combine KAR 102-2-9 and 102-2-9B.
Not 9, but B and 102-2-9B and maybe A. the way they used to do reciprocity was very different for master's level and bachelor's, so I have to put that into the reciprocity rate.
Okay, so which means if it's put in there, then that regulation would need to be revoked, correct?
I don't know, I have to look.
Okay.
Yeah. But I'm not presenting those two today.
Okay.
Those are the two that I asked be removed because I didn't have them.
Okay, we'll circle back around to that. So the next one up is.
102, 211.
11.
Yes, 102-2-11.
I think it's the correct site.
And this is for renewal.
Uh-huh. So this is for renewal. Subsection E said they had to send the renewal in a timely manner, which is not specific enough. So I said they need to send it before the date of the date the license expires. And then, if the license has been expired for 1 year or less, they have to pay the penalty fee equal to the renewal fee. And again, before the date the license expires is being added to replace in a timely manner.
Okay.
It says before the date the license expires. Can you go back up?
Maybe by the date.
I was just wondering where that was.
Right there.
It's not submit.
Submit a completed.
And what would you do if you got it the day before it expires?
Review it.
We actually allow people to, as long as it's postmarked by the expiration date, or they have to renew.
So technically they're,
By the date, by the date of the license expiration. They can renew up to 11:59 online.
So you're saying like by 12 PM on the date the license expires? Then it'd
Yeah.
have to be time stamped, right?
But yeah, so it's really by the date the
By,
license expires,
yeah.
not before the date. The difference of a day, but is that kind of what you're asking about, or?
no, I was just wondering how you handle that, because technically their license expires and you haven't had time to review. So they're really kind of functioning in a.
In a gray area,
Yeah.
yes, they should send it before then, but they don't.
That's why I was wondering why we don't require it. A month before, so you have time to review it.
Right.
And
Yeah, I think that would be nice, but I think the statute allows them to do it until the date it expires.
gotcha.
But I'll change the before to by.
Any questions about 102-2-11? Is there consensus to move that forward with the adjustment in language of by the expiration date?
Yes.
I see support. I don't see any objections, so we will move this one forward as consensus by the board. And then the next is 102-2-11A.
And that is the renewal audit, and it has the same language as the addiction counselor, saying that we want copies of the CEU documents or them uploaded in a system that's approved by the board.
System.
And it looks like that's the only.
Those are the only two changes, yes.
Okay. Any questions about KAR 102-2-11A?
No.
Is there consensus to move this one forward as well? Okay. Looks like there is consensus, so we will move forward that regulation as it's described. And then KAR 102-2-14.
And that is the designation to the DSM and adding text revision to the current regulation.
And yeah, you should be able to see my screen now, just that addition of the words text revision, similar to the other similar regulation. Any questions? Is there consensus to move this recommendation forward as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, then we will move that item forward as well. So thank you for all of your work, Leslie, and
Yeah.
thank you, board members.
All right, that takes us to review of recommendations on regulation of artificial intelligence by advisory committees.
So we have been talking about this as the board has been considering how to be helpful in the area of regulating artificial intelligence usage by practitioners. And we I brought this to the different advisory committees. There's been some discussion. 3 of the advisory committees felt like they were at a position to where they could make recommendations back to the board. So I wanted to share those recommendations with you all. The first one is for the Behavior Analyst Advisory Committee. So I will just read off what they had recommended back to the board. The Behavior Analyst Advisory Committee made the following recommendations. 1, if using artificial intelligence in practice, informed consent must if using artificial intelligence in practice, what they would recommend is that the informed consent include notifying clients that artificial intelligence is being used, as well as how it is being used. 2, if using artificial intelligence when providing care to clients, one must ensure confidentiality of information that is intended to be kept confidential. And then 3, if using artificial intelligence in practice, providers must provide clients with the ability to opt out. The recommendations from the Master's Level Psychology Advisory Committee were similar. 3 recommendations: if an individual is using artificial intelligence in practice, there should be informed consent. So clients are being notified that AI is being used. 2, if an individual is using AI in practice, they must take safeguards to ensure they are keeping confidential information confidential and secure. And then 3, there should be a way for clients to opt out if they do not wish for AI to be used as part of the services they are receiving. And then 3 was the recommendation from the Professional Counseling Advisory Committee. And for that advisory committee, the advisory committee was in consensus to bring the following topics to the board for review. Informed consent regarding what specifically is being used in terms of client care, giving the option for clients to opt out of the use of AI, and making sure the confidentiality of clients is protected. So there are 3 recommendations for you. You do not have to act on these today. The remaining advisory committees are still discussing these topics, but I thought I would bring these 3 to you today so you could hear what the recommendations have been so far. Ultimately, we'll just collect these from each of the advisory committees, and then you can take them up once you have the recommendations from all groups, or I'll notify you if one group decides they do not wish to make recommendations back to the board.
All right, thank you, Dave. Any questions in regard to that?
Not really a question, but just a statement. And Tim, I need you to correct my Holiday Inn Express JD. But informed consent by matter of law can always be withdrawn at any time by a patient. And the second is, no matter what happens, a patient cannot waive a practitioner's responsibility to comply with HIPAA. And if you don't know where that information is going and who has access to it, that can be a huge problem. So I don't think we need to do anything with that today. I want to see everything together. I just wanted to throw those things out. I've been doing a lot of reading and research with my friends in risk and compliance, and those things stand out as paramount. Everybody's talking about get a consent. Well, consent can always be withdrawn, and HIPAA is going to lay over the top of this. And so if somebody's using AI and that data and that information is being stored someplace that's not HIPAA compliant, there could be a real problem there. So, but that's my Holiday Inn Express JD.
Very good. Anybody else have any comments?
No, I'm just looking at, like, the .2 from the VA committee. One must ensure confidentiality of information that is tended to be kept confidential. That would in fact address your concern, Jim, right? Because if it's being stored someplace that is not HIPAA compliant, then it's not confidential. So making sure that the language is clear, that it's not only ensuring the confidentiality of information, but that the storage of such information complies with appropriate standard of care practices, right? Something along those lines. But yeah, I think we need to have something in.
Yeah, it's interesting. The term HIPAA is, as opposed to confidentiality, I think could be interpreted in two different ways, because HIPAA is a standard set of standards and laws. The other thing is, when it comes to the VA, in my experience, I never know what really applies to the VA, since they're a federal
Right.
agency, and I'd have to go back and look and dig into the law to see exactly if it's exempted in federal institutions or federal providers. But just good conversation.
Yeah. I think we do need to have something though, and some guidance, because it's not going away. It's here. It's only going to become more ubiquitous. And I just think it's important.
Yeah, very good. We'll continue our conversation on that at future meetings. That takes us to a discussion on our strategic plan for the BSRB. And we've talked a little bit about that, doing some SWOT analysis, and I think Dave and I have had some conversations. We'll have some material coming out prior to the next board meeting for you to review and provide some input on, in regard to looking at doing a SWOT analysis. And then when we meet next, starting a process that we think is, going to be an ongoing kind of evolving process for developing a strategic plan for the BSRB. Anything you want to add to that?
Nope, I think that's good.
All right. Any questions or comments on that? That takes us to a discussion on alternate pathways to licensure.
And this has been a discussion topic by some of the advisory committees. I don't have any official recommendations. There have been a couple that have discussed this and decided they will likely not have any recommendations on alternative pathways, either because there is a standard, prevailing standard for licensure, or to make sure that things are balanced in the way that they are currently balanced. But I know that there are some advisory committees that are continuing to discuss this, so I don't have any recommendations to bring to you today, but I just wanted to keep it on here because there are still some advisory committees discussing this topic.
Very good. That takes us to a discussion on possible licensing pathway for artificial intelligence mental health agents. To your point, Linda.
Yeah, so I have been contacted by an individual who is interested if the board was open to considering a licensure pathway, maybe being created for an artificial intelligence mental health agent. And so I wanted to just bring this item to you all to let you know that this is something that is being discussed. I wanted to turn it over to you so you could kind of discuss it as a board. And I don't have any specific direction to you, but when these items do come up, I want to give you the opportunity to be made aware of those kind of contacts, and then have the ability to discuss them as a board. So I'll turn it over to all of you if you have questions. I don't have a lot of additional information to share. It's more of a conceptual item, but I did want to bring it to you since it was a timely matter that came to me before the board meeting. So.
Do you want to give a little background as to what it was we were approached specifically with?
So I know in the past we have talked about artificial intelligence and we have talked about the board's jurisdiction and that we regulate individuals and we don't even regulate facilities. And so for individuals to come under the authority of the board, we look to see if someone is a person and it's kind of just a basic, a status. And so, but we have talked about things like if someone creates a chatbot and the chatbot gives advice, do we regulate the chatbot or do we regulate the person who created the chatbot? And so in this instance, there's an entity that is curious if the board would be open to having a discussion on a pathway in this direction. And so, you know, I would have thought this potentially could have been something in the future, but the future is moving very quickly. And so I just kind of wanted to bring it to you. You don't have to reach a decision on something like this today. I just kind of wanted to make you aware of this. I'm not sure if I can really share too much more. I'm trying to keep this broad because it's really more about sort of the concept, I guess, in general versus one specific person or one specific company. Just kind of wanted to allow you the opportunity to be made aware of this and see if you had any questions or to see if you had any thoughts about the concept right now.
Well, we know they're using AI in diagnosis for other medical issues. Do we know if there's any licensure or certification that's required for those programs?
And Cynthia, sorry, which programs were you talking about?
The AI that's being used in medical diagnosis. There's a lot of that happening now and studies of either comparing, you know, doctors' diagnostic skills to doctor plus AI to two doctors without AI, et cetera. But that's a very trending thing in the medical world. Are those programs, do we know if any of those are licensed or certified or being required to meet certain set of standards at this point?
I am unsure. I have seen it asserted that perhaps there has been at least one that has met certain standards, but I don't know enough about this topic myself. I haven't really had an opportunity to research a lot to see what are the standards and what are the differences. And so I have heard at least an assertion that in the medical field there may be something, but I don't know enough about it to really talk too much about that.
So would the analogy be in the medical field, someone approaching and saying, I'd like to have my AI become an MD?
I think that is possible.
Wow.
Yeah, to become a licensed provider.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's scary, but I can go back to 1995. The first, if you would, primitive AI was developed in the use of mammography breast cancer screening. When we took images at the time were not digital, were still film, and they were scanned. And they, if you would, the term AI actually examined the images and pointed out areas of interest to the radiologist. Didn't diagnose, but pointed out areas of interest. Their recent analysis of some 200, I'll have to go back and find it now, 200 or so cases where physicians were confronted with the use of AI for medical purposes versus just an AI computer. The initial slant, I'm going to call it a slant because these are physicians now evaluating whether a robot can do their job. So, you know, you have to be careful. But it was almost 50% of the time patients were under referred or under triaged as far as the urgency of the medical situation that was put in front of them. So this is an interesting question. I certainly would be to this year against it, but I certainly wouldn't be opposed to, as a community, all of our communities collectively testing the veracity of an AI to see where it goes moving forward. I don't know that anybody could say we're there yet, but I think veracity testing must be strong before something like this is before the doors open.
David, weren't there two different states that talked about this at the AASCB, that there were two states that passed laws saying you cannot license AI as a licensed mental health professional?
When it comes to mental health, I think you're right. I think it's Illinois is one of them.
Illinois, yeah. Illinois was the first one, I
And
think.
then the other, I think either is Utah. But there's also been some limitation legislation from Nevada. There is a bill in front of the Kansas legislature this year. I don't think it will move forward because it was introduced fairly late. But there's a Senate bill, I think it's Senate Bill 408, that was going to prohibit certain chatbots from being able to suggest certain course of action. In terms of things like suicide and that kind of thing. So I'm thinking it had a hearing, but I don't think it's going to move forward this year based on how late it was introduced. But yeah, I don't know if there's been a trend yet, but at least a couple states have taken action.
Well, kind of along that bill that you're talking about, what was included was also that a person could not feed a chatbot with negative information and that sort of thing. And so it was almost like it was going to be able to, if someone was found in violation, they would go for that person that was feeding the chatbot negative information. And so that's interesting.
Wow.
Well, the interesting thing as we go through this, and I think we're farther away from it than I think many people are. But the whole reality is if someone's developing an AI, let's make it clear they want to get paid. And so if you're not, an insurance provider is going to want to see how you're licensed. And so it's going to be interesting if they develop two levels of pay for a chatbot AI versus a person, or if they even approve it at some point. Can you imagine getting reimbursed for that? And who's behind, who's the character behind the wall? Going back to the Wizard of Oz. Somebody's got to be there programming it, or some group of people. So,
Or if it's
scary.
them.
Right.
Some
Or if
insurance
it's them.
companies are already, referring to their own provider network. And
I agree. I would not in any way infer that insurance companies wouldn't be behind this, because they can probably feel if they get it right, they can do it cheaper than having to pay people.
Yes.
I agree.
all right, well, that's certainly going to be an ongoing and I think rapidly developing issue for us. I too thought it was going to be kind of a slow progression, and then
We are.
we got this request and I was like, wow, okay.
I mean,
All
like,
right, that
seriously,
takes
how
us-
do you even, how would you even develop a licensing process for that? I mean,
Yeah,
sorry,
good question.
I'll stop.
Well, and we've even talked about from a practical standpoint, a lot of our professions have a standardized licensing examination that prohibits the use of technology when you're taking that examination. And so it seems like that prohibition of technology would prohibit the AI from even taking the exam. So there's some technical things that need to be studied and worked through. But appreciate your conversation and thoughtfulness on this. I'll gather some more research on it if the states have passed legislation restricting AI this year and bring it back to the next meeting.
All right, thanks.
So also, David, as your or your staff is doing that research, are there any other states out there that license AI as a provider type to be able to provide mental health services? I mean,
I'll distribute that on a couple of listservs and see if other states have been contacted with similar inquiries.
thank you.
All right. Look, possible date for 2026 out of town planning meeting. We are currently looking at Monday, September 28th. And generally, as we do these, we have people come in on Sunday and maybe have dinner and then spend all day Monday in our planning meeting. So take a look at your calendar and let Dave know if that date works.
What's the date
Our
again?
Monday, September 28th. It'll be the last Monday in September.
And we're looking at Kansas City, right? If that's helpful in terms of travel.
Yeah, I think over the last 4 years, we did Overland Park, and then we did Wichita, and then Lawrence and Manhattan this year, or this past year. And so Kansas City, Kansas is not an area we've been to yet, but based on the location of a lot of board members, it makes sense, and it's been in the rotation. So it's been about 5 years.
Our next board meeting will be on May 11th. We will have a special guest. Marion, is it Bernetti Atwell, who's the CEO for ASPPB? Talk a little bit about why she's coming and
Sure. So Marianne Bernetti Atwell is the CEO of the National Association that assists regulatory boards for psychology in different states and provinces. And she has made it a priority over the last few years that she tries to visit a handful of states and jurisdiction. Her goal is to visit all states and provinces that license psychology so that she can kind of make connections, make sure everyone's connected to the resources from ASPPB. We've been talking to her at a national level the last few years about a number of different items. And we've had the ability for our state to weigh in on some of the discussion topics like the EPPP. We've been having board members serve on a couple of the committees. And so I had mentioned to her that if she's still looking at continuing this, we would love to have her visit Kansas and see our board here. And so she reached out earlier this year. We checked to see when there were conflicts, and this worked out the best for both her and the board members. And so she'll be visiting us. She'll only be in town for about a day or maybe two, just touching base with us at the licensing board. And also she was interested in meeting all of you as board members too, if you're able to come to Topeka for that meeting. So.
yeah, we would encourage as many folks as possible who might be able to join us in person for that. In addition, today, we know that there is mental health advocacy at the Capitol. And Dave and I talked about trying to kind of keep an eye on that date for next year to make sure, if we can, that it doesn't fall on the same day as our board meeting. But so we will try our best to do that. All right. I would accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right, motion has been moved and seconded. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Have a great week, all. Thank you for your work today.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Have a good day.
Take care, everybody.